Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Kennedy. This is Charles Motts,
Glad to
my
be here.
co-host.
Glad to be here today.
Welcome back to Barn Talk. So, Charles, today we're still talking about the 30s and early 40s. So, I'd like to know the first development here in West Covina. It's right here. It was done by Mr. Meeker, right here off Meeker and Garvey. What was the purpose of that?
Well, that kind of took place when the Depression came. The bank of years ago, the bank of Baldwin Park were owned by a group of people, and they were responsible to the people who deposited money in the bank. It's a little different today. If your bank went broke, they came after the stockholders. And during the Depression, that bank was solvent. It's a very good bank, but they closed it. The federal government closed all banks in the United States, and they were closed for a week or so. But that bank and other banks, the small banks, could not reopen because they had lost too much money by then. So as we get farther into the Depression, the government came in and said the assets of the stockholders, the investors of that bank, had to sell it off, whatever they had, their homes, their land, to make that bank and pay back the people who had deposited money in the bank and their savings accounts. So the president of the bank and his stockholders owned quite a bit of this property, and they started selling it off. Now, the bank did not own it, they owned it. That was the big difference in those days. But they had to make the bank solvent because it was their business. So they started selling it off, and it's half acres residential, and they call it leap and bounds. That's where a man goes along and takes so many steps and marks off a half acre and puts in a stake. And you could buy that half acre. They did put the roads in and the curbs and the sewerage and electricity. The bank did. And this was great. You could drive on Garvey Avenue to West Covina. You had a nice half acre. You could build your own house, build a little barn. You could have some animals, horses, and you could have a garden. And if you wanted to, you could just drive over in a couple minutes or have your wife or somebody take you over to Baldwin Park and catch the red car and the flyer and be in Los Angeles in about 15 minutes. So, you know, the farmers were not going to sell their land off because they needed it to make a living. And if it hadn't been for the Depression, that land may never opened up.
So uh, they were forced to sell the land, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at this point, it's the late 30s, early 40s. There's less than 1,000 people. There's what, in between maybe 700 and 1,000 people that are in West Covina.
Yes.
So basically, everybody was a farmer. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
had their 30 acres of property
Mm-hmm.
or 20 acres, whatever, and they all had their ranch style homes. So now this was like the first development. Why didn't one of the farmers just buy it and just plant crops? Was there a reason, or did the developer get the land first?
The developer was the bank.
Oh, so Mr. Meeker was the bank?
Was the bank?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking like people like Joe Hurst and like your grandfather or the Kranzes or the people who lived in the general area, the Maxons, the Burgers. I don't know why they just didn't swallow up that property.
Yeah, because the bank, actually, the owners of the bank, Mr. Meeker,
Okay,
that was his ranch.
I didn't know that. Okay,
And other holders in the bank had maybe 10 acres or 20, because it did kind of go across the freeway a little bit, and they had to sell off their holdings to pay back the depositors in that bank kind of after the Depression or short at the end of it. And now the stockholders and the owners of the bank don't have to do that. It makes a big difference if it's your bank. And it was kind of a sad thing that happened, but it made a nice development for sure.
yeah, and then I know they brought in Fred's Market after World War II, probably
Yeah.
the latter part of the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So then you finally got a market down there. But so that was the first development. It's actually Sunkist and Meeker
Mm-hmm.
and Garvey Avenue. So And that's not that far from from Baldwin Park to get to the train station there, right?
No, take the red car. You know, if your wife worked over that way or she didn't work, she put you in the car and you were there in 5 minutes. Took the flyer in town. You had a nice breakfast. We talked about the breakfast.
Oh, I was going to ask you a question, Charles. So when you got to LA, how'd you get around? Did you walk or did you take another train or how did that work?
Well, where we got off at the depot, or if you didn't take the flyer, we didn't take the flyer every time. It would just go along, and when it got down to Alameda Street or wherever you want, it just got you off. You just pulled the lever on the back of the car wherever you were. He stopped the trolley, and you got out. Now, they had a nice thing. They had the left-hand lane, then they had the railroad tracks, then they had the right-hand lane on both sides. So as the trolley was going down the street, or the red car, and it got to the intersection where there was a light, people were waiting to get on. More or less, you walked across the intersection when it turned green, but right after you passed the right lane, they had a divider, a concrete divider you got up on.
Okay.
And that's where it stopped. So when the trolley or the red car stopped, it didn't stop traffic. They just kept going in both lanes. Right hand could go right hand, left hand. And they, sometimes when it was busy, they'd have a conductor there and he'd punch your card. And so basically, if you didn't take the flyer, you were right where you wanted to be. You waited. And we used to take the 134 right down to Washington Boulevard, where the Santa Fe railroads were, where my grandfather was. So basically, within, I'd say 30 minutes, we were right downtown and ready to go. So they designed that so you did not block traffic when the streetcar stopped.
Okay.
If the light was red or green, they went on. And I think that was the number one positive thing that Mr. Huntington did. And of course, you could follow the trolley car down, but when it stopped, you had to stop. I always thought when we were standing there right next to the right-hand lane and the trolley car, what if some guy didn't turn right? He would plow us all down, but I never heard of one, so it's kind of interesting. Saw it on a Laurel and Hardy movie, though. But it was an easy way to get around. So if you bought a house in Baldwin Park, half acre, build your own home, have your animals, and within half hour, 45 minutes, you're at work. And it's pretty darn nice. And live in the country. Would West Covina had developed if that property hadn't been sold off? Not at that time, no. The farmers were not going to sell because that's how they made a living. So
okay. So like Covina was what a square mile and all there or something like that.
Yeah.
And everybody lived in that square mile, and then everything around Covina was all their farming.
That's right.
Where they had basically orange groves, and everybody was a farmer over there, or most people. Mm-hmm. So with West Covina, so that was the first development.
Yeah, that was.
So where was the second development?
I would say the second development was on the other side of Irwindale in that area. That was some oranges up in there, but West Covina, developed late, and but once it developed Yeah.
It all boomed at once. Now this was pre-World War II.
Yeah.
So that was the first development, all the homes. Mm-hmm. So was everything just south of the freeway? Was there anything north?
Not too much, but there was some stuff north, but it was over by Baldwin Park more.
Okay.
It was coming out, you might come out of the city of Baldwin Park or the town, and it worked its way towards Orange Avenue. And as you drive into Baldwin Park, you can see those deep lots today. They're building condominiums on them. But basically, after the Second War, the GI Bill, it was pretty hard not to develop your land that wasn't producing produce.
Yeah, where my mom's house was, that she lived on a cul-de-sac, and it was right next to Baldwin Park High School. And those tracks were developed in 1952.
Yes.
So that was that was 7 years after the war.
Yes.
So that's when all those started going in there.
Yeah.
Early 50s.
Early 50s, and then after the Korean War, it just boomed here.
Yeah.
And you just couldn't hang on to the land because people wanted it for housing.
Yeah. Well,
And-
they taxed everybody out of it. The
Yeah.
government said there was too much demand for housing,
Mhm.
and they basically taxed all the farmers out.
Yeah,
that's the truth. That's where
yeah,
that's how this barn started.
yeah,
With the
that's
tax
right.
revolt.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
And-
exactly right. And we talked about the Wickman Act. Orange County put it through and saved a lot of land for Disney to expand and other people. But we didn't get that in LA County. And it just had to, you're right, the taxes were just too high.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to good farming land. And of course, we were close to LA too, Los Angeles. And it makes a big difference. And what a climate, right? Beautiful area.
So back then when you were a kid, so there was no street lights.
No, there weren't any
So
streetlights.
it was just dark.
It was, yeah, that's right.
So
we were talking about.
what happens if you needed the police or an ambulance or something? What happened? Did you just die?
Well, you could. If you had you called Baldwin Park,
Okay.
and you would hope that somebody would show up. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
If you needed hospital help, you would go to Covina.
Okay.
If you had a fire, you'd call both Covina and West Covina and hope one would come. And sometimes they both would show up. They were volunteers.
Okay.
Basically, Baldwin Park was a volunteer fire department. I don't even know if they really had a chief. Covina had a nicer fire department. You've probably seen it on College Street. But yeah, there was no policemen.
So
They'd
it
show
was
up.
quiet. Everybody had to defend themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and if you had a problem, if you didn't get there, then that was just how it was.
Yeah, they'll be
Wow.
out in the morning. We'll see you in the
Wow.
morning. You know? Don't worry, we'll be there first thing in the morning when we all get in. But you remember when we were talking, you had a West Covina, you had to have your own motorcycle
Yeah.
to get a job. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the
Yeah.
policeman told us. He goes, "Yeah, you had to have your own motorcycle."
that's right. And about a third of the barn boys, the old timers who are gone now, they were all volunteers in Baldwin Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were
And-
they volunteer firemen?
yeah, volunteer firemen.
Wow.
They-
I see now that's something I didn't know
Yeah.
either.
Yeah, Earl Marin and the one who owned the hardware store, Merwin, and down the line, they would be all called out. And during the war, over here on Sunset was the air raid horn. I guess I'd throw that in, the Second War. My dad would blow the air raid horn, and everybody'd come out to Garvey Avenue to see if they were bombing Los Angeles. So we couldn't blow the horn anymore. It became everybody in town was coming out to look, because you could see Los Angeles all the way down Garvey.
Wow.
And we had the air raid horn, and but yeah, they were all volunteers, and that was one of the reasons they came out to see if LA was being bombed, because if they were, they had to go down there. That was part of their job. And
So that was a civil defense, right?
civil defense, yeah.
Okay.
And it was kind of spooky when you think about it. There were no street lights, no signals. I don't think at that time they had any. I think they were all stop signs on Garvey,
Wow.
because I remember the stop signs, and
Yeah.
there was no Fred's Market.
Wow. Wow.
It was, you were out here, and we had more fog than we ever had. We don't have fog like we used to. And I remember going to school, in grammar school, the fog would be so bad you could hardly go across Sunset, even though it wasn't have much traffic. But you were really on your own. And I guess that was the way farms were all over the country.
Yes. So, with that, we'd like to say thank you for watching, and have a nice day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.